In the MGM Grand Garden Arena of Las Vegas, a silver-bearded martial arts legend sat quietly in the front row, while a global superstar strutted across the cage. What began as a charity exhibition turned deadly serious when Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson mocked Chuck Norris as just a movie cowboy. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical aging action star. For decades, he was a six-time world karate champion, Bruce Lee's sparring partner, and a man known for blending discipline with devastating efficiency. When The Rock doubled down on his taunts, claiming Chuck's fights belonged on movie sets, not in cages, he had no idea he was awakening a storm. Chuck's silent, strategic response turned a spectacle into a lesson, sparking consequences that rippled far beyond the octagon. What began as playful banter became a clash of philosophies. Flash versus mastery. Noise versus silence. The MGM Grand and the millions watching worldwide would never forget the night Chuck Norris reminded the world what real strength looked like. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas pulsed with raw energy. Spotlights swept across the crowd like searchlights, illuminating a sea of expectant faces. Every seat was filled with celebrities, athletes, and fight fans packed shoulder to shoulder, their collective anticipation creating an almost physical presence in the air. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. Welcome to Champions Unite, the biggest charity exhibition event of the year. The crowd roared as the giant screens flickered to life, showing highlight reels of the night's star-studded lineup. Famous faces dotted the front rows. Actors, musicians, sports legends, all gathered for a night where entertainment met martial arts excellence for a worthy cause. Samantha Lee adjusted her headset in the commentator's booth, her experienced eyes scanning the arena. 10 years as a sports journalist before becoming one of the most respected voices in combat sports had taught her to feel the emotional current of a crowd. "There's something electric about tonight, Jim," she said to her co-commentator. "When you get this many legends in one room, egos are bound to clash." The lights dimmed suddenly, and a familiar entrance theme thundered through the speakers. The crowd surged to their feet as pyrotechnics exploded around the entrance ramp. "If you smell what The Rock is cooking!" Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson emerged through a cloud of smoke, arms outstretched, his massive frame silhouetted against the flashing lights. The arena erupted. He wasn't there to fight, he was the celebrity guest host, the main attraction drawing eyes and donations to the charity event. The Rock strode down the aisle with the same swagger that had made him a WWE icon before his Hollywood ascension. He slapped hands with fans, posed for the cameras, and bounded up the steps into the ring with athletic grace that belied his size. Standing center stage, microphone in hand, he soaked in the adoration. Finally, The Rock has come back to Las Vegas. His catchphrase elicited exactly the response he wanted, waves of cheers washing over him. The Rock grinned, pacing the ring like he owned it. This wasn't a wrestling ring anymore, but an MMA cage specially designed for tonight's exhibition matches. Still, he commanded it with the same magnetism. "Look at that crowd," Samantha commented. "The Rock still has them in the palm of his hand after all these years." The Rock's voice boomed through the arena. "The Rock says it's amazing to see so many legends under one roof tonight. We've got fighters, actors, world champions all here to raise money for the kids." He paused, scanning the VIP section with theatrical deliberation. His gaze settled on a figure sitting calmly in the front row, a man whose very stillness seemed to draw attention. Chuck Norris sat with perfect posture, his face unreadable beneath his signature beard, now silvered with age, but no less imposing. The Rock's smile widened, a mischievous gleam entering his eye. "And speaking of legends," The Rock sees Chuck Norris is in the house tonight. The spotlight swung to illuminate Chuck, who acknowledged it with a slight nod. The man, the myth, the meme. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The Rock continued, his charisma building momentum. You know, The Rock has always wondered something about Chuck Norris. He leaned against the ropes, casual arrogance personified. All those Chuck Norris facts, all those movies. But The Rock wonders if Chuck Norris has ever actually been in a real fight. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some laughed. Others gasped. The Rock was walking a fine line between playful banter and genuine disrespect. I mean, The Rock respects the movie career. Who doesn't love a good cowboy who knows karate? He winked at the crowd. But let's be honest. Walker, Texas Ranger, was what? 25 years ago. The Rock thinks maybe Chuck Norris is just a movie cowboy who got lucky with a good reputation. In the commentator's booth, Samantha Lee straightened. Wow, that's bold. The Rock is playing with fire there. The cameras cut to Chuck Norris. Unlike the reactive faces around him, the wide eyes, the dropped jaws, the nudging elbows, Chuck remained perfectly still. Not a muscle in his face twitched. His eyes, however, had locked onto The Rock with laser focus. Something in that gaze made The Rock pause mid-stride. For a heartbeat, the showman's smile faltered. He recovered quickly, but Samantha caught it. Did you see that? She whispered to her co-commentator. For just a second there, I think The Rock realized he might have crossed a line. The Rock, ever the performer, pivoted smoothly. But hey, we're all friends here. The Rock is just having some fun. This is what we do, right? Talk a little trash? Get the crowd going? He turned his attention to the night's scheduled fights, but the energy had shifted. Throughout the VIP section, eyes kept darting toward Chuck Norris, whose calm stillness now seemed less like passivity and more like the eye of a hurricane. Tonight's going to be interesting, Samantha murmured into her microphone. The Rock may have just awakened something he wasn't prepared for. As The Rock finished his opening monologue and the first fighters were announced, the spotlight moved away from Chuck Norris. But in its absence, the legend seemed to command even more attention. He hadn't said a word. He hadn't moved an inch. He didn't need to. The cage door clanged shut with metallic finality. Inside, Marcus Vega bounced on the balls of his feet, his lean physique marked with tattoos that told his story rising from the streets of Miami to become the most talked-about fighter in MMA. Across from him stood James "Iron" Sullivan, a veteran fighter with 15 years of experience etched into the scars on his face. Our first exhibition match tonight pits youth against experience, Samantha Lee's voice carried through the arena. Marcus Vega, the social media sensation with a perfect record, facing off against James Sullivan, who's been in this game since Vega was in high school. Marcus flashed his trademark grin at the cameras, then made a throat-cutting gesture toward Sullivan. The older fighter simply nodded, hands raised in the traditional fighter's stance, no wasted movement, no theatrics. In the front row, The Rock had taken a seat near Chuck Norris, though he'd left 2 empty chairs between them. The space seemed symbolic somehow. A buffer zone between clashing philosophies. The Rock leaned forward, elbows on knees, eager to watch the young fighter who reminded many people of himself, brash, confident, built for the spotlight. The referee called both fighters to center cage for final instructions. Marcus used even this moment to perform, flexing, winking at female fans in the front row, never breaking eye contact with Sullivan when the ref asked for a clean fight. "Touch gloves, gentlemen," the referee instructed. Sullivan extended his hand. Marcus knocked it aside with a smirk and backpedaled. playing to the crowd. Sullivan's face remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed slightly. The bell rang. Marcus exploded forward with blinding speed, throwing a flying knee that caught Sullivan off guard. The veteran fighter stumbled back, and Marcus pressed his advantage, unleashing a flurry of punches that drove Sullivan against the cage. "Vega coming out aggressive early," Samantha called out. "Sullivan needs to weather this storm and find his rhythm." Sullivan covered up, absorbing the punishment while looking for openings. He was using experience to compensate for the younger man's speed, but Marcus's attacks were relentless. "You getting tired already, old man?" Marcus taunted between strikes, loud enough for the front rows to hear. Sullivan responded with a sharp counter-right that nearly connected. Marcus danced away, laughing. "Almost got me there, Grandpa," he called out. "But this ain't your era anymore." The Rock grinned, clearly enjoying the young fighter's swagger. He glanced sideways at Chuck Norris, as if to say, "See? This is what real fighters look like today." Chuck's expression remained unchanged, his eyes tracking every movement in the cage with clinical precision. Marcus continued his onslaught, mixing flashy spinning techniques with solid fundamentals. Midway through the round, he caught Sullivan with a perfectly timed head kick that echoed through the arena. Sullivan wobbled but remained standing. "Show's over, old-timer," Marcus said, loud enough for the front row to hear. He winked at the Rock before launching into a final combination. Left hook to the body, right uppercut that snapped Sullivan's head back. Spinning back elbow that connected with devastating accuracy. Sullivan collapsed. The referee jumped in, waving off the fight. Medics rushed into the cage. Marcus didn't wait for the official announcement. He climbed the cage and roared, beating his chest as the crowd responded with mixed reactions. Admiration for his skill, discomfort at his disrespect. "Vega gets it done in spectacular fashion," Samantha commented, "but I'm not loving the showboating while Sullivan is still being checked by medical staff." Marcus jumped down and grabbed the microphone from the ring announcer. His breathing was barely labored, as if the fight had been nothing more than a warm-up. "That's how we do it in 2025, he shouted. "Old school is out! New school rules!" He strutted around the cage, playing to different sections of the crowd. When he reached the side facing the VIP section, his eyes locked onto the Rock, who was nodding appreciatively, and then shifted to Chuck Norris. "I see some legends out there who think they could hang with me," Marcus continued, pointing directly at Chuck. "But trust me, what works in the movies doesn't work in here. This is reality." The Rock laughed, clapping his hands. Chuck Norris remained still, but something subtle shifted in his posture, a minute straightening of his spine, a slight narrowing of his gaze. Marcus wasn't finished. "You know what's funny? These old-timers with their ancient techniques and their tough guy reputations, they were great for their time, but their time is over." He pointed at Chuck again. "Texas Ranger couldn't last 30 seconds with me." A murmur ran through the crowd. Marcus was going too far. Even the Rock's smile faltered slightly. In the commentary booth, Samantha shook her head. "Vega is crossing a line here. There's promoting yourself, and then there's disrespecting legends." As Sullivan was helped out of the cage, Marcus continued his victory lap, soaking in the attention. "Anyone else want to step up? Any other legends think they can hang with the new generation?" He locked eyes with the Rock, who was now caught in an uncomfortable position. The crowd sensed the tension and began to stir. Some started chanting, "Rocky, Rocky," while others called out, "Chuck, Chuck." The Rock stood up, playing to the moment. He approached the cage but stayed outside it, microphone in hand. The Rock appreciates the invitation, but this isn't the Rock's world anymore. The Rock makes movies now. He laughed, diffusing some of the tension. But The Rock does love the energy of the new generation. That fire, that confidence reminds The Rock of himself back in the day. Marcus nodded, appreciating the acknowledgement from the superstar. The Rock continued, turning slightly toward Chuck Norris. Of course, some legends never really tested themselves in the real arena, did they? They built reputations in controlled environments, movie sets, choreographed fights. The crowd reacted with a collective intake of breath. The Rock was doubling down on his earlier comments, using Marcus's victory as ammunition. In the commentary booth, Samantha Lee leaned forward. He's calling out Chuck Norris again. This isn't just playful banter anymore. The cameras panned to Chuck Norris, who hadn't moved from his seat. His expression remained unreadable, but there was something different in his eyes now, a cold intensity that made several nearby spectators shift uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus, feeding off The Rock's comments, jumped back in. That's right. There's a big difference between movie fighting and real fighting. I respect the legends. But let's be real. Half of them would get destroyed in today's game. The crowd's reaction was split. Younger fans cheered Marcus on, while others began to boo the disrespect. A chant started in one section. Chuck! 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 It spread slowly at first. Then, with gathering momentum, The Rock tried to regain control of the moment, but the chant grew louder. Marcus scoffed, playing to his supporters. You want to see Chuck Norris in here? Trust me, you don't. It wouldn't be pretty. The chanting grew louder. Chuck! 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 All eyes turned to the legend in the front row, who had yet to speak a single word or make a single unnecessary movement since the night began. The atmosphere in the arena had transformed completely from the festive opening. Now it crackled with tension. The collision of ego and legacy, showmanship and substance. Two generations of fighting philosophy were about to clash, and everyone could feel it coming. The chants continued to build, rippling through the arena like waves against a shore. Chuck! 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 The Rock stood at the edge of the cage, microphone still in hand, caught between playing to the crowd and maintaining control of the situation he'd created. His charismatic smile remained in place, but a new calculation worked behind his eyes. Listen to that, he said, gesturing to the crowd. Sounds like the people want to see if the legend lives up to the myth. The spotlight swung back to Chuck Norris, still seated in the front row. At 75, his frame remained solid, his posture perfect. The years had silvered his hair and beard, but had taken nothing from his presence. If anything, age had distilled it, concentrated it into something more potent. Marcus Vega leaned against the cage, grinning. I don't think he wants any of this, he called out, loud enough to be heard without the microphone. Smart move, old-timer. Samantha Lee's voice cut through the moment. For those just joining us, we're witnessing an unexpected situation developing at the Champions Unite charity exhibition. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and rising MMA star Marcus Vega appear to be calling out martial arts legend Chuck Norris. Her co-commentator cleared his throat. Sam, it's worth remembering that while Chuck Norris is known to the younger generation for internet memes, he's a legitimate martial arts pioneer. 6-time world karate champion, trained with Bruce Lee. And he hasn't responded to any of this provocation, Samantha cut in. Which, frankly, speaks volumes. The Rock, sensing the crowd's growing anticipation, decided to escalate. He had crossed a line, and now the only way forward was through. He stepped closer to where Chuck Saturday. The Rock respects Chuck Norris's contributions to martial arts films, but let's be real here, there's a world of difference between choreographed movie fights and stepping into this cage. He gestured expansively. The Rock transitioned from the wrestling ring to Hollywood, but at least The Rock proved himself in real competition first. The crowd responded with a mixture of cheers and boos. The Rock wasn't used to divided reactions, and it fueled something in him, a need to win over the room completely, to dominate the narrative. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tell you what, Chuck, he continued, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. Why don't you show these people what you've really got? Step into this cage. No cameras, no directors, no second takes, just you, and, well, The Rock wouldn't want to embarrass a legend. So maybe you can start with someone more your speed. Laughter rippled through sections of the crowd, but it was nervous laughter. The Rock was walking a dangerous line between entertainment and genuine disrespect. Unless, of course, you're just a cowboy in boots, not a fighter in heart. The words hung in the air. A hush fell over the arena, as if everyone collectively held their breath. And then, without fanfare, Chuck Norris stood up. The simple action silenced every voice in the arena. He made no dramatic gestures, offered no trash talk in return. He simply rose to his full height, straightened the cuffs of his dress shirt, and turned his gaze directly at The Rock. The Rock faltered for a split second before recovering his showman's composure. Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like Chuck Norris might actually… Chuck! 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 The chant resumed. Louder now, drowning out The Rock's attempt to control the narrative. The energy in the room had shifted palpably. What had started as The Rock's show was becoming something else entirely. In the commentary booth, Samantha leaned forward. In all my years covering combat sports, I've never felt an arena shift allegiance so quickly. There's something happening here that goes beyond the usual spectacle. Chuck Norris began walking toward the cage steps. His movements unhurried, but purposeful. Security personnel glanced at each other uncertainly, then stepped aside. No one was going to be the person who stopped Chuck Norris. Marcus Vega's cocky grin faltered slightly as Chuck approached. He backed away from that side of the cage, trying to play it off as giving the legend space rather than a retreat. The Rock, master showman that he was, seized the opportunity to recenter himself in the moment. He moved to the cage door and held it open with theatrical flourish. The moment of truth, he announced. Will the legend step up, or will he? Chuck Norris stepped past him without acknowledgement, entering the cage with the same calm presence he'd displayed all evening. His eyes briefly met Marcus Vega's, and the young fighter instinctively backed up another step before catching himself. Inside the cage now, Chuck stood relaxed but perfectly balanced. He had removed his suit jacket, revealing a simple button-down shirt that did little to hide the fact that, even in his 70s, he maintained the physique of a man decades younger. The Rock followed him into the cage, microphone still in hand, determined to maintain his role as the center of attention. Well, he said, circling slightly, playing to the cameras. The legend actually stepped up. The Rock is impressed already. Chuck remained silent, his eyes following The Rock's movement with unnerving focus. The question is, The Rock continued, his voice carrying the theatricality that had made him famous. Was this a good idea? Chuck Norris may have been something in his day, but his day was, what? 40 years ago? The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered The Rock's boldness. Others booed the disrespect shown to a legend. The division fueled The Rock's performance. If he couldn't win everyone over, he'd at least make sure they were all engaged. Don't get The Rock wrong, he said, moving closer to Chuck. The Rock respects what you've accomplished. The movies, the memes, you've had a great run. But this is reality. He gestured to the cage around them. No stunt doubles here, Chuck. No second takes. Throughout this speech, Chuck Norris had not moved, had not spoken. His stillness was becoming unnerving, even to The Rock. In the face of such calm, The Rock's words seemed to grow hollow, his gestures increasingly theatrical. Marcus Vega, sensing the moment slipping away from both of them, stepped forward. "Hey, let me show the legend how we do things in 2025, he offered with a smirk. "Hold up," The Rock said, raising a hand. "This isn't your moment, kid." His smile didn't reach his eyes. The Rock wasn't about to share the spotlight he'd created. Chuck Norris finally moved. It was a simple shift of weight, a subtle change in stance, but it drew every eye in the arena. Without speaking a word, he had taken control of the moment. He looked at The Rock with clear, steady eyes, then made a simple, "come ahead" gesture. With one hand, the crowd erupted. "Oh my God," Samantha exclaimed from the commentary booth. Chuck Norris just invited The Rock to back up his words. The Rock's expression froze somewhere between his showman's smile and genuine surprise. This wasn't how he had expected the moment to unfold. He had called out someone he believed would either decline the challenge or respond with words of his own, creating a verbal sparring match. The Rock knew he could win. Instead, he faced a man who had skipped all pretense and gone straight to the challenge itself. The Rock was trapped. He had pushed too far to back down without losing face, yet something in Chuck's calm confidence suggested he might be out of his depth. For perhaps the first time in his career, The Rock had lost control of the narrative. "Well," he said, buying time, adjusting the microphone in his hand, "The Rock thinks—" Chuck reached out and gently took the microphone from The Rock's hand. The simple action, neither aggressive nor rushed, nevertheless demonstrated a speed that belied his age. He turned the microphone off and handed it to a production assistant outside the cage. No more words. No more showmanship. Just two men in a cage, with thousands watching to see what would happen next. The Rock, suddenly without his primary weapon, his voice felt exposed. But years in the wrestling ring had taught him to adapt. He rolled his shoulders, flexed his impressive physique, and moved into a fighting stance of his own. "Rocky, Rocky," half the crowd chanted. "Chuck! Chuck!" the other half responded. In the center of the cage, two generations of action stars faced off. One built on charisma and showmanship, the other on quiet, lethal competence. The legend and the superstar. The cowboy and the wrestler. Silence and spectacle. And everyone knew whatever happened next would become the stuff of legend itself. The MGM Grand Garden Arena fell into an expectant hush as Chuck Norris ascended the 4 steel steps leading to the cage. Every movement he made was deliberate, unhurried, carrying the weight of decades of discipline. At 75, his body moved with a fluid economy that belied his age, each step precise, balanced, nothing wasted. The cage door swung open with a metallic creak that seemed to echo in the silence. Samantha Lee's voice barely rose above a whisper in the commentary booth. "In 30 years of covering combat sports, I've never felt an arena this quiet with this many people in it." Inside the octagon, The Rock stood with his feet planted wide, his massive frame casting a long shadow under the overhead lights. His expression wavered between his showman's confidence and a new uncertainty. This wasn't following the script he'd imagined when he first called out the legend. Chuck Norris was supposed to laugh it off, or respond with words of his own, creating the kind of verbal sparring match The Rock had mastered over decades in WWE rings and on movie sets. Instead, Chuck had simply accepted. And in doing so, he'd changed the rules of engagement entirely. Chuck stepped through the threshold of the cage door. his presence somehow expanding to fill the space, despite his modest stature compared to The Rock's imposing physique. He rolled his shoulders once, a small, efficient movement, and adjusted the cuffs of his dress shirt. He hadn't bothered changing into athletic wear. The simple button-down and slacks he'd worn to the event were apparently sufficient for whatever he anticipated would happen next. "Interesting choice of attire," Samantha observed. "Chuck Norris doesn't feel the need to dress the part. It's as if he's saying he could handle this situation in any context." The cage door clanged shut behind him, the sound reverberating through the arena like a church bell. Security personnel exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unsure of their role in this unplanned confrontation. One of them reached for his radio, likely seeking guidance from management, but stopped when he caught the intensity of focus in the crowd. No one wanted to be the person who interrupted this moment. The Rock, ever the professional, recovered his composure quickly. He stepped forward, his movements exaggerated and theatrical, playing to the cameras, even in this unexpected situation. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying without a microphone through the silent arena. The legend actually stepped up. He circled slightly, rotating his massive shoulders. The Rock is impressed already. Chuck remained motionless in the center of the cage, his feet positioned in what martial arts practitioners would recognize as a neutral stance, neither aggressive nor defensive, perfectly balanced and ready to transition in any direction. His hands hung loose at his sides, not clenched into fists but not completely relaxed either. His breathing was calm, almost meditative, the disciplined breath control of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering his body. The Rock continued circling, each step deliberately placed, his wrestler's instinct for positioning never abandoning him even in this unusual context. "The question is," he said, maintaining his third-person cadence, "was this a good idea? Chuck Norris may have been something in his day, but his day was, what, 40 years ago?" Chuck's eyes tracked The Rock's movement with unnerving focus, his head barely moving, his body rotating only as much as necessary to keep The Rock centered in his field of vision. It was the economy of movement that had defined his fighting style for 6 decades, no wasted energy, no unnecessary motion. In the front row, Marcus Vega leaned forward, his earlier cockiness giving way to a student's analytical attention. He had risen to the top of modern MMA through flashy techniques and social media savvy, but something in Chuck's stillness was triggering a recognition of something deeper than spectacle. "This isn't right," Marcus muttered to his coach sitting beside him. "Rock's moving too much. Burning energy. The old man's just waiting." His coach nodded grimly. "That's the difference between someone who learned fighting as entertainment and someone who learned it as combat." The crowd's energy had transformed from the typical bloodlust of fight fans into something more nuanced, a collective holding of breath, a sense of witnessing something rare and valuable. Phones remained raised, recording every second, but the usual shouts for violence had quieted to murmurs of anticipation. "Don't get The Rock wrong," The Rock continued, moving closer to Chuck. "The Rock respects what you've accomplished. The movies, the memes, you've had a great run. But this?" He gestured to the cage around them. "This is reality." He emphasized the last word, his voice dropping an octave. "No stunt doubles here, Chuck. No second takes." Throughout this speech, Chuck had not moved, had not spoken. His stillness was becoming unnerving, even to The Rock, whose words seemed to lose substance in the face of such complete composure. The Rock was accustomed to opponents who matched his energy, who shouted back, who postured and preened, creating the back and forth that entertainment fighting required. Chuck's silence was disrupting his rhythm, making his theatrical movements seem increasingly hollow. In the commentary booth, Samantha Lee leaned toward her microphone. "What we're seeing here is fascinating. The Rock is a master of controlling narrative through words and energy. Chuck Norris is countering with absolute stillness, and it's working. The Rock seems increasingly uncomfortable with the silence. The Rock's circuits around Chuck had gradually tightened, bringing him closer to the martial arts legend with each pass. Now, only a few feet separated them. The size difference was pronounced, the Rock towering over Chuck, his frame wider, more muscular, showcasing the aesthetic power built through modern training techniques and nutrition. Chuck, by contrast, possessed a different kind of physical presence. Decades of martial arts training had created a body of functional strength rather than showcased muscle. His posture spoke of potential energy coiled and ready, but never tense. Years of discipline had erased any unnecessary movements from his behavioral vocabulary. Marcus Vega, sensing the moment slipping away from both himself and The Rock, stood up and called out from ringside. "Hey, let me show the legend how we do things in 2025. His voice carried a forced bravado, an attempt to reclaim some of the spotlight. "Hold up," The Rock said, raising a hand without taking his eyes off Chuck. "This isn't your moment, kid." The dismissal was clear, the message unmistakable. The Rock wasn't about to share this stage he'd created, even as he felt it shifting beneath his feet. Chuck Norris finally moved. It was a simple shift of weight, a subtle change in stance, but it drew every eye in the arena. Without speaking a word, he had taken control of the moment, simply by engaging it on his terms. He looked at The Rock, with clear, steady eyes, then made a simple, "come ahead" gesture, with one hand. The movement was minimal, a slight forward motion of his palm, but its meaning was unmistakable. The crowd erupted in response, thousands of voices releasing the tension they'd been holding. Samantha Lee's exclamation captured the collective reaction. "Oh my God!" Chuck Norris just invited The Rock to back up his words. The Rock's expression froze somewhere between his showman's smile and genuine surprise. This wasn't how he had expected the moment to unfold. He had called out someone he believed would either decline the challenge or respond with words of his own, creating a verbal sparring match. The Rock knew he could win. Instead, he faced a man who had skipped all pretense and gone straight to the heart of the challenge itself. There would be no promo battle, no exchange of catchphrases. Chuck Norris had cut through the theater and reduced the moment to its essence. Two men, one cage, a test of skill. The Rock was trapped by his own creation. He had pushed too far to back down without losing face, yet something in Chuck's calm confidence suggested he might be stepping into waters deeper than he'd anticipated. For perhaps the first time in his storied career, The Rock had lost control of the narrative. "Well," he said, buying time, adjusting the microphone in his hand. "The Rock thinks." Chuck reached out and gently took the microphone from The Rock's hand. The simple action, neither aggressive nor rushed, nevertheless demonstrated a speed that belied his age. He turned the microphone off and handed it to a production assistant outside the cage. No more words. No more showmanship. Just two men in a cage, with thousands watching to see what would happen next. The Rock. Suddenly, without his primary weapon, his voice felt exposed in a way he hadn't experienced since his earliest days in the wrestling ring. But years of performing in hostile environments had taught him to adapt. He rolled his shoulders, a practiced movement designed to showcase his impressive physique, and settled into a fighting stance of his own, wide, theatrical, but grounded in the legitimate combat training he'd received throughout his wrestling career. "Rocky! Rocky!" half the crowd chanted, their voices rising in rhythmic support. "Chuck! Chuck!" the other half responded, the dueling chants creating a sonic manifestation of the philosophical clash unfolding in the cage. In the center of the octagon, two generations of action stars faced off, one built on charisma and showmanship, the other on quiet, lethal competence. They represented different eras, different approaches to both combat and celebrity. The Rock, the modern multimedia star, whose persona was carefully crafted across social platforms and marketing campaigns. Chuck, the old-school icon who had built his reputation through skill rather than self-promotion. The cage, designed for violence and spectacle, had transformed into something else entirely. A vessel of tension so thick it seemed to absorb the arena's light. The typical pre-fight energy of bloodlust and adrenaline had given way to something more nuanced, a collective sense of witnessing a moment where something beyond physical prowess was being tested. The Rock, master of the moment, decided to seize control through action. He began to circle, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet, playing to the crowd with exaggerated movements. This was familiar territory for him, working the audience, building anticipation. Chuck pivoted smoothly to track him, wasting no motion, his eyes never leaving the Rock's center mass. The contrast in their movement philosophies couldn't have been more pronounced. The Rock dynamic and expansive, Chuck efficient and contained. "The silence from Chuck Norris is deafening," Samantha commented. In an age of constant self-promotion, his refusal to engage in the verbal battle is almost shocking. The Rock feinted forward, testing Chuck's reactions. The older man didn't flinch, didn't overreact, just made the minimum adjustment necessary to maintain optimal distance. The feint revealed nothing about his capabilities or intentions. And this seemed to unsettle the Rock further. Frustration flickered across the Rock's face. His usual tactics weren't working. He was used to opponents who matched his energy, who engaged in the back and forth that made for good television. Chuck's stillness was throwing him off balance more effectively than any physical attack could have. "Come on, Chuck," The Rock finally said, breaking the silence. "Show me something. Anything." He moved forward more deliberately now, closing distance. Hands raised in a fighter's guard that mixed his wrestling background with boxing fundamentals he'd learned for film roles. The crowd leaned forward collectively, thousands of bodies moving as one. This was it, the moment contact would be made. The point where theater would give way to reality. Chuck waited, perfectly balanced, until The Rock committed to a jab, quick but telegraphed. More about testing reactions than landing cleanly. Chuck slipped it with a minimal head movement that spoke of thousands of hours of practice, the kind of efficiency that only comes when a movement has been refined to its essential elements. The crowd gasped at the speed. The Rock himself looked momentarily surprised, then covered it with a grin. "Not bad for an old-timer," he said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. He followed with a combination jab, cross, exaggerated but athletic. His fists whistled through empty air as Chuck economically evaded each strike, never moving more than necessary, never countering yet. In the front row, Marcus Vega watched with narrowing eyes, his earlier bravado fading as he recognized something his ego hadn't wanted to acknowledge: the fluid efficiency of movements that came from decades of mastery. The Rock pressed forward more aggressively, throwing a hooking punch with real commitment behind it. Chuck finally moved decisively, not backwards, but toward the punch. He slipped inside the Rock's extended arm and executed a simple wrist control that redirected the Rock's momentum, sending him stumbling sideways. The move wasn't flashy. It contained no spinning kicks or acrobatics. It was just perfect timing and leverage, the physical embodiment of the principle that true mastery looks effortless. The crowd erupted. The Rock regained his balance and turned, genuine surprise visible beneath his showman's facade. He had felt the control in that simple redirection, the power that required no strength, only perfect understanding of body mechanics. "Incredible economy of movement from Chuck Norris," Samantha Lee observed. "He's not fighting the Rock's fight, he's forcing the Rock to fight his." Something shifted in the Rock's expression, the realization that this wasn't going according to his script. His next attacks came with more genuine intent, less theatrical flourish. A sharp jab, a powerful cross, a sweeping hook that would have ended the confrontation if it had landed. Chuck slipped the jab, blocked the cross with a forearm that didn't give an inch despite the Rock's superior size, and ducked the hook. As the Rock's momentum carried him forward, Chuck executed a simple sweep that took the Rock's feet from under him. The Rock hit the mat with a thud that silenced the arena. He was up quickly, athleticism undiminished by his 52 years. But the message had been sent. This wasn't a movie star getting lucky against a wrestler. This was a lifelong martial artist demonstrating why his reputation had endured for half a century. "The difference we're seeing," Samantha said into the stunned silence, "is between someone who learned to fight for entertainment and someone who built his life around martial arts as a discipline." The Rock circled more cautiously now, respect beginning to replace the dismissive confidence in his expression. Chuck remained centered, balanced, prepared. He hadn't even broken a sweat. In that moment, something passed between the two men, an unspoken acknowledgement. The Rock had entered this confrontation thinking of Chuck as a relic, a manufactured legend whose reputation exceeded his capabilities. Now, facing the reality of decades of disciplined mastery, he was reassessing everything. But The Rock hadn't become a global superstar by backing down. His jaw set with determination. And he launched forward with his most committed attack. Yet a flurry of punches followed by a clinch attempt that would utilize his superior size and wrestling background. Chuck didn't retreat. He moved into the storm. His blocks and parries so precise that none of The Rock's punches landed cleanly. When The Rock lunged for the clinch, Chuck stepped slightly offline and executed a simple hip throw that used The Rock's momentum and weight against him. For the second time, The Rock hit the mat harder this time, the impact resonating through the cage. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. The chant was no longer divided. It had unified into a single name. The Rock rolled to his feet, breathing harder now, a new wariness in his eyes. He had underestimated Chuck Norris in every possible way, and that miscalculation was being exposed in front of thousands. "We are watching a masterclass in humility," Samantha Lee said quietly. "And I don't mean that Chuck Norris is humbling The Rock, though that's happening. I mean we're seeing what true humility looks like, mastery without arrogance, skill without the need to dominate through anything but competence." The two men faced each other again in the center of the cage. The Rock's theatrical flourishes had vanished, replaced by genuine focus. Chuck's expression remained unchanged, calm, centered, present. In that moment of clarity, The Rock made a decision. Instead of continuing what was becoming an increasingly one-sided demonstration, he lowered his hands and nodded to Chuck a fighter's acknowledgement of respect. Chuck responded with a small nod of his own, the first real response he'd shown to any of The Rock's actions or words all night. The crowd, sensing the shift, held its collective breath. This wasn't following the usual script of confrontation, build-up, and violent resolution that both sports and entertainment had conditioned them to expect. This was something more nuanced, more genuine, a moment of mutual recognition between two men who had taken very different paths to legendary status. The unfolding scene was like watching two philosophical approaches to life itself, made manifest through these representatives of different eras, one built on external validation and spectacle, the other on internal mastery and quiet competence. But the moment of potential resolution was shattered as Marcus Vega suddenly vaulted into the cage. The crowd's roar slowly subsided into a charged murmur as medical staff attended to Marcus Vega. The young fighter sat on the canvas, still gasping for air, his expression oscillating between physical pain and the deeper sting of humiliation. What had begun as his triumphant night, a showcase of the new guard's dominance, had devolved into a stark lesson in the difference between confidence and arrogance. The simple palm strike from Chuck Norris had collapsed not just his diaphragm, but the entire edifice of his self-image. In the center of the cage, The Rock and Chuck Norris stood barely 3 feet apart. The physical contrast between them was striking. The Rock's massive frame, sculpted through decades of modern fitness science and relentless training, towered over Chuck's more modest stature. Yet in this moment, presence wasn't measured in inches or pounds. The Rock's breathing came heavier now, not from exhaustion but from the humbling realization dawning across his features. Sweat glistened on his forehead under the arena lights, while Chuck remained dry. His breathing unchanged, as if the brief, physical exchange had required no more exertion than a casual stroll. Samantha Lee leaned forward in the commentary booth, her voice hushed with reverence. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're witnessing transcends sport or entertainment. This is philosophy made manifest, a living demonstration of the difference between those who train for applause and those who train for mastery." The Rock stepped back, creating space between himself and Chuck. His typical showman's smile had vanished, replaced by something rarer, genuine introspection. He glanced at Marcus, still attended by medical staff, then back at Chuck, whose expression remained impassive but not unkind. "The Rock came out here tonight with something to prove," he began, his voice carrying a gravity that silenced the murmurs. The third-person persona that had become his trademark now sounded less like a gimmick and more like a man trying to process an unexpected truth through the distance of narrative. The Rock thought he was showing strength by challenging a legend, but The Rock just learned what real strength looks like. He turned to Chuck Norris. "It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to." The crowd responded with appreciative applause, sensing they were witnessing something authentic amid an evening planned as entertainment. The Rock continued, finding his rhythm in this unexpected moment of humility. "The Rock has been in this business for nearly 30 years. WWE, Hollywood, you name it. The Rock has worked with the biggest, the baddest, the most talented people on the planet." He paused, glancing at Chuck. "But The Rock just learned more about fighting, about discipline in 2 minutes than in 30 years of entertainment." Across the cage, Marcus Vega had regained his feet, assisted by medics. His face burned with embarrassment as he tried to slip out of the cage unnoticed. The Rock, however, wasn't finished with the lesson. "Hold up, young blood," he called to Marcus. "You need to hear this too." Marcus froze, caught between pride and the reality of what had just happened to him. His shoulders tensed, his jaw clenched. For a moment, it seemed he might ignore The Rock's call, might choose the temporary comfort of retreat over the harder path of facing his humiliation. But something in The Rock's tone, not mocking, but urgent with the need to share a realization, made him turn back. The Rock beckoned him forward. Reluctantly, Marcus approached, his usual swagger replaced by a stiff, defensive posture. His eyes darted between The Rock and Chuck Norris, uncertainty replacing the cocky certainty that had defined him just minutes earlier. "The Rock sees himself in you," The Rock said, surprising both Marcus and the crowd. "Talented, confident, born to entertain." He paused, looking between Marcus and Chuck. "But tonight, The Rock learned something he wishes he'd understood 20 years ago." He gestured toward Chuck Norris, who stood quietly, his presence more commanding in stillness than The Rock's had been in full performance mode. "This man right here hasn't said a single word all night. Didn't need to. Didn't throw a single unnecessary punch. Didn't waste energy on showing off." The Rock's voice carried genuine admiration now. When The Rock called him just a movie cowboy, The Rock couldn't have been more wrong. Chuck Norris is what we all should aspire to be, someone who doesn't need to tell you how tough he island. The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, eyes downcast, fingers absently touching his sternum, where Chuck's palm strike had connected. "Look at him," The Rock continued, addressing Marcus directly now. "Really look. This is a man who was winning world championships while most of us were in diapers. Who trained with Bruce Lee. Who built a reputation not through social media or trash talk, but through decades of discipline." Marcus lifted his gaze reluctantly, studying Chuck with new eyes. The older fighter remained centered. His posture relaxed, yet perfect, embodying the principles that had guided his life for over 6 decades. Chuck Norris remained impassive, though something in his eyes suggested he appreciated The Rock's words. If not the theatrical delivery, there was a quiet dignity in his stillness, a security that came from having nothing to prove. The Rock came out here talking about real fighters and movie cowboys. The Rock continued, his voice taking on a reflective quality unusual for his public persona. But The Rock just learned the hardest lesson in fighting. It's not about who talks the loudest or looks the strongest. It's about mastery, control, discipline. He turned to face Chuck directly. The Rock apologizes, Chuck, sincerely. The Rock got caught up in his own hype and disrespected a true legend. The arena fell silent. The Rock, global superstar, one of the highest-paid entertainers on the planet, was publicly admitting he was wrong. It was a vulnerability rarely seen from a man whose brand was built on unwavering confidence. In the front rows, several celebrities who had come for the charity event exchanged glances, recognizing the rarity of the moment. Chuck Norris finally moved. He stepped forward and placed a hand on The Rock's shoulder, a simple gesture that somehow carried more weight than any words could have. He nodded once, acceptance clear in the gesture. "Now that," Samantha Lee said softly into her microphone, "is what legends are made of." Marcus Vega stood awkwardly to the side, forgotten by the crowd, a supporting character in a moment that had transcended his understanding. The young fighter who had entered the night certain of his superiority was now faced with the reality that he had barely begun his journey. "Kid," Chuck said suddenly, his voice quiet but carrying a resonance that commanded attention. The single word, the first he'd spoken all night, sent a ripple through the arena. "Come here." Marcus hesitated, then stepped forward, unable to disobey the simple command. "You have talent," Chuck said, each word measured, deliberate. "Real talent. But talent without discipline is just wasted potential." Marcus nodded stiffly, swallowing hard. "You fight to be seen," Chuck continued. "I train to be invisible. There's a difference." "I don't understand," Marcus admitted, his voice barely audible. "The best technique is the one your opponent never sees coming," Chuck explained. "Not because it's flashy, but because it's efficient. Nothing wasted. No movement for show." The Rock watched this exchange with newfound respect in his eyes. He had come to the event expecting to be the center of attention, the biggest star in the room. Now he found himself a student alongside Marcus, absorbing wisdom from a man who had never sought the spotlight but had earned the respect of generations. The Rock spent years in the wrestling ring. The Rock interjected, breaking character by using first person, learning how to make every move look bigger than life, selling the spectacle, playing to the crowd. He shook his head slightly. "But I just realized that's the opposite of real fighting. Real fighting is about ending the confrontation with minimum effort." Chuck nodded, a hint of approval in his expression. "Entertainment fighting is about prolonging the show," he said. "Real combat is about ending it before it begins." Marcus's expression shifted as understanding began to dawn. "So, all those spinning kicks, the flashy combinations, have their place in sport," Chuck acknowledged. But real mastery is about fundamentals perfected over thousands of repetitions. About timing that comes from decades of practice. About staying calm when everyone around you is giving in to emotion. The crowd listened in rapt attention. What had begun as entertainment had transformed into education. The thousands who had come for spectacle were now witnessing something far more valuable, the transmission of wisdom across generations. The Rock has been asking himself, The Rock said, resuming his third-person cadence but with a new authenticity, what it means to be strong. The Rock built a career on looking strong, sounding strong, convincing everyone he was the most electrifying man in entertainment. He gestured toward Chuck. But this man redefined strength for The Rock tonight. Strength isn't about how loud you can talk or how impressive you look. It's about control over your body, your emotions, your ego. Chuck's expression softened slightly. It took me decades to understand that, he said. When I was young, I was like both of you, hungry to prove myself, to be recognized. It wasn't until I started training with masters who had nothing to prove that I began to understand true strength comes from within. Marcus nodded slowly, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine receptivity. That move you used on me, it looked like nothing, but it felt like getting hit by a truck. Maximum effect with minimum effort, Chuck said. That's the goal. Not looking good, but being effective. In the commentary booth, Samantha Lee whispered to her co-commentator, This has gone beyond a viral moment. This is turning into a legitimate philosophical exchange about the nature of martial arts and strength itself. The Rock, sensing the significance of the moment, gestured to a nearby production assistant. Get this man a microphone, he said, pointing to Chuck. People need to hear this. The assistant quickly slipped a wireless microphone through the cage to Chuck, who accepted it with a slight hesitation. Chuck, The Rock said, you've been silent most of the night. While The Rock and this young man, he gestured to Marcus, have been talking non-stop. Maybe it's time the real master shared some wisdom with everyone here. Chuck considered the microphone in his hand, then looked out at the arena, packed with thousands of spectators, cameras recording his every movement. For a moment, it seemed he might decline, might choose to keep his philosophy to himself. Then he raised the microphone. Fighting isn't about looking good, he began, his voice steady and clear. It's about being effective. It's not about impressing others, it's about mastering yourself. The crowd fell completely silent, hanging on every word. I've spent 7 decades studying martial arts, Chuck continued. The longer I trained, the more I realized how little I knew. The mark of a master isn't confidence. It's humility. The understanding that there's always more to learn, always room to improve. He turned to Marcus. You have physical gifts I never had. You're faster, stronger than I was at your age. But gifts without discipline are just potential. And potential means nothing until it's realized through work thousands of hours when no one's watching, no one's filming, no one's cheering. Marcus nodded, absorbing the lesson with growing respect in his eyes. Chuck turned to The Rock. And you have a platform, a voice that reaches millions. That's a different kind of power. With it comes responsibility to model not just physical strength, but strength of character. The Rock nodded solemnly, accepting the gentle rebuke without defensiveness. True strength, Chuck concluded, isn't about dominating others. It's about mastering yourself. It's not measured by how many people know your name, but by how you conduct yourself when no one is watching. He handed the microphone back to The Rock, having said all he needed to say in just a few sentences, embodying the economy and communication that mirrored his physical efficiency. The arena erupted in applause, not the frenzied roar of entertainment, but the deeper appreciation of wisdom recognized. Parents turned to children, pointing at Chuck, explaining who he was and what he represented. Older fans nodded in vindication, their respect for the legend renewed and validated. Younger spectators watched with newfound appreciation for a man many had known only through internet memes. The Rock stepped forward, microphone in hand. "The Rock wants to thank Chuck Norris," he said, his theatrical persona now serving to elevate Chuck rather than himself. "Not just for stepping into this cage tonight, but for teaching The Rock, teaching all of us what real strength looks like." He turned to the crowd. "The Rock has been in arenas all over the world. The Rock has heard his name chanted by millions. But tonight, The Rock is proud to lead a chant for someone who deserves it more." He raised his hand, leading the crowd. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The arena joined in, the chant building to a crescendo that seemed to shake the foundations of the building. In that moment, with thousands chanting his name, Chuck Norris remained exactly as he had been throughout the night. Composed, centered, present. He acknowledged the adulation with a small nod, neither feeding off it nor rejecting it, simply accepting it as one more experience in a lifetime dedicated to mastery. In the front row, Marcus Vega joined the chant, any remaining traces of his earlier arrogance washed away by genuine respect. The young fighter who had entered the night certain he represented the future of combat was now faced with the humbling realization that the old master still had lessons to teach that transcended generations, techniques, and trends. The Rock watched the crowd's reaction, a new understanding visible in his expression. He had built a career on commanding attention, on being the most charismatic person in any room. Yet here was Chuck Norris, commanding even more respect through his restraint, his discipline, his unshakable centeredness. In that moment, with thousands watching and millions more certain to see the footage online within hours, 3 generations of fighters stood in a cage built for conflict. But what they'd found instead was something more valuable, a moment of genuine respect, of ego surrendering to wisdom, of flash giving way to substance. The cameras caught it all. The Rock, humbled but somehow more authentic than he'd ever been. Chuck Norris, commanding respect without demanding it. And Marcus Vega, witnessing a masterclass in what it truly meant to be strong. The night had begun as entertainment. It was ending as education. And in a world increasingly dominated by noise, spectacle, and self-promotion, the quiet strength demonstrated by Chuck Norris resonated with something many had forgotten, but all recognized: true power doesn't need to announce itself. It's simply island. Dawn broke over Las Vegas, painting the strip in hues of gold and amber. The MGM Grand stood silent. The roaring crowds of the previous night, replaced by cleaning crews, sweeping up the physical remnants of a moment that had already transcended its origins. Empty cups, discarded programs, and confetti littered the arena floor, mundane debris from an event that had proven anything but ordinary. In the upper offices of the MGM Grand, event organizers and executives huddled around screens, watching social media metrics climb with dizzying speed. What had begun as a charity exhibition match had morphed overnight into a cultural phenomenon. Clips from the confrontation between The Rock and Chuck Norris dominated every platform, with views counting in the hundreds of millions. "This wasn't what we planned," the head of promotion said, scrolling through his tablet. "But my God, the engagement is off the charts. Every news outlet wants access. Every talk show wants interviews." The charity director nodded, her eyes bright with opportunity. The donation portal crashed twice from traffic overload. "We've raised more in 12 hours than our initial 2-week projection." Outside their window, digital billboards along the strip had already been updated to feature images of the confrontation. Chuck's composed stillness juxtaposed with The Rock's humbled expression. Below these images, quotes from The Rock's unexpected speech of humility scrolled in bold letters. The Rock just learned what real strength looks like. In hotel suites across the city, those involved in the previous night's unexpected drama were waking to a world transformed by what had transpired in that cage. The Rock sat on the edge of his bed in the MGM Grand's presidential suite, scrolling through his phone. His publicist had sent 37 text messages overnight, each more urgent than the last. His agent had left 14 voicemails. Every major network wanted an exclusive. His social media accounts had gained millions of followers in hours. But it wasn't the numbers that caught his attention. It was the comments beneath the viral clips. Never respected The Rock more than when he admitted he was wrong. That moment when Chuck Norris controlled the room without saying a word. This is what real strength looks like. First time I've seen genuine humility from a celebrity. My son asked me to explain what happened, showed him it's never too late to learn respect. The Rock set down his phone, a thoughtful expression replacing his usual camera-ready smile. In 20 years of stardom, he'd experienced every form of adulation the entertainment world had to offer. But this morning, he was feeling something new. A different kind of respect. Not for his charisma, or his physique, or his box office draw, but for the humility he'd shown in the face of a lesson he hadn't expected to receive. His phone buzzed with a text from his agent. Good morning. Every talk show in America wants you. What do you want to do? Fallon's offering prime slot tonight. Kimmel tomorrow. Name your price. The Rock thought for a moment, then typed, Nothing yet. This isn't about publicity. The agent's response was immediate. You're the #1 trending topic, globally. We need to capitalize. The Rock stared at the message, feeling a clarity he hadn't expected. He typed simply, Give me 48 hours. Something more important to do first. He set the phone down and walked to the window, looking out over the Vegas skyline. The city was waking up, but something in him had already awakened a recognition that perhaps the constant pursuit of more attention, more acclaim, more spotlight, had been missing something essential. Across town, in a more modest hotel suite at the Bellagio, Chuck Norris completed his morning routine of meditation and stretching the same discipline he'd maintained for over 60 years. His movements were fluid, precise, unchanged by age or the events of the previous night. The discipline that had defined his life continued regardless of external validation or attention. His phone had been turned off since before the event. The notifications, interview requests, and viral metrics meant nothing to him. When his longtime manager had called the hotel landline with news of the social media explosion, Chuck had listened politely, then asked about the charity donations. Learning they had quadrupled expectations, he'd expressed satisfaction, then returned to his morning routine. A soft knock at the door interrupted his final stretches. He opened it to find a hotel staff member holding a handwritten note. Mr. Norris, this was left for you at the front desk. Chuck thanked him quietly and unfolded the note. It was brief, written in a bold hand. Thank you for the lesson. Not just in fighting, but in strength of character. I meant what I said last night. Would like to continue the conversation if you're willing. Room 2701. DJ. Chuck allowed himself a small smile, the first real expression he'd shown since the entire affair began. He carefully folded the note and placed it in his wallet. Meanwhile, in a sleek downtown high-rise gym, Marcus Vega pounded a heavy bag with focused intensity. Gone were the flashy combinations and exaggerated movements designed to impress onlookers. Instead, he worked with quiet precision. Each strike, deliberate, efficient. His coach watched from the corner, arms crossed. Different approach today, he observed. Marcus paused, wiping sweat from his brow. I got embarrassed in front of the whole world last night. By a 75-year-old man who barely moved. His coach nodded. And what did you learn from it? Is a Marcus returned to the bag, his strikes even more focused now. That I've been training to look good, not to be good. He landed a clean, simple combination. That stops today. The coach studied his fighter with new interest. Marcus had been his most talented student but also his most frustrating, blessed with natural abilities, but cursed with an ego that made him resistant to deeper instruction. Now, something had shifted. You know, the coach said carefully. I tried to tell you this for 2 years. Marcus nodded, not breaking his rhythm on the bag. I wouldn't have listened. I needed to feel it. He stopped, turning to his coach. Can we cancel the media appearances this week? The podcast interviews? The sponsorship meetings? The coach raised an eyebrow. You've been chasing those opportunities since day one. I need to focus on fundamentals, Marcus said, a new seriousness in his tone. No cameras. No audience. Just work. Across the country, millions of people were starting their day with the viral footage of what was already being called the lesson. Morning shows played the clips on repeat. Commentators analyzed every movement, every word. Social media feeds overflowed with memes and moment-by-moment breakdowns. But beyond the entertainment value, something deeper was resonating with viewers. In an age of constant self-promotion, where the loudest voice often commanded the most attention, the sight of Chuck Norris commanding respect through silence and skill struck a powerful chord. Parents showed the clips to children, using them to discuss the difference between confidence and arrogance. Martial arts schools reported surge in enrollment inquiries, specifically from adults, citing a desire to learn real discipline, not just techniques. Business leadership forums were already dissecting the exchange as a case study in authentic versus performative authority. Back in Las Vegas, Samantha Lee sat in an empty conference room at the MGM Grand, recording a special podcast episode analyzing the previous night's events. 3 major networks had already reached out with job offers based on her commentary during the confrontation. What we witnessed wasn't just an unexpected confrontation between icons, she said into the microphone. It was a clash of philosophies that transcended the individuals involved. She paused, collecting her thoughts. The Rock represents the modern approach to strength, charismatic, larger than life, built for cameras and audiences. He's a product of an era where your personal brand is as important as your actual abilities. Chuck Norris, on the other hand, embodies something older, something that existed long before social media and personal branding. His strength was forged through decades of discipline when no one was watching. It's authentic because it wasn't developed for public consumption. She leaned forward. And in that moment when they faced each other, we all got to see which approach stands the test of time. Flash versus substance. Noise versus silence. Showmanship versus mastery. Her producer gave her a thumbs up from behind the glass. That's going to resonate, he said through the intercom. The metrics on your commentary clips from last night are insane. Samantha smiled slightly. Ironic, isn't it? We're getting attention for talking about how true mastery doesn't seek attention. That evening, a private dining room in one of Las Vegas's most exclusive restaurants hosted an unexpected meeting. The Rock had arranged it, sending personal invitations to a select few from the previous night's event. Chuck Norris arrived first, dressed simply but impeccably in a navy blazer and crisp white shirt. No tie, no flashy accessories, nothing unnecessary, true to form. The Rock followed shortly after, his usual entourage noticeably absent. Samantha Lee was next, professional curiosity overcoming her journalistic detachment. Last to arrive was Marcus Vega, uncharacteristically subdued, approaching the table with something like reverence. No phones were allowed. No cameras. No publicists or managers. Just four people whose lives had intersected in an unexpected moment that none of them had planned, but all would remember. The Rock rose as everyone was seated. He was dressed down by his standards, a simple black button-up and slacks, rather than his usual custom suits or branded athleisure wear. The massive gold watch and chains that typically adorned his wrists and neck were absent. "Thank you all for coming," he said, momentarily abandoning his third-person persona. No cameras. No recording. No social media. Just us. He raised his glass. "To lessons learned," he said simply. Chuck nodded, the smallest of smiles playing at the corner of his mouth. "You know," The Rock said after they'd ordered, momentarily slipping back into his familiar third-person pattern. The Rock has spent his entire career cultivating a certain image, being the biggest, the loudest, the most electrifying man in the room. He shook his head slightly. And then last night, The Rock got completely overshadowed by a man who didn't say a single word. Chuck's smile widened slightly. "Words are overrated," he said. His voice quiet, but carrying a resonant depth that commanded attention more effectively than any shouting could have. "Most people talk too much and listen too little." Marcus, who had been silent since arriving, finally spoke. "I've been watching the footage all day. That move you used on me, it looked like nothing. Felt like getting hit by a truck." There was genuine wonder in his voice. "How?" "Efficiency," Chuck replied simply. "No wasted energy. No movement for show." "Could you teach me?" Marcus asked, the brash confidence of the previous night replaced by genuine humility. Chuck studied the young fighter for a long moment. "Depends. Are you willing to learn without an audience? To practice for years? Before showing anyone?" Marcus nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. Samantha Lee watched this exchange with professional interest. "You've all become part of something bigger than yourselves," she observed. "The footage has gone beyond viral. It sparked genuine discussions about what strength really means, what commands respect in today's world." The Rock nodded thoughtfully. The Rock built a career on being loud, being seen. But last night, he glanced at Chuck. The Rock learned that true legacy is built in silence, through discipline when the cameras are off. Chuck, who had been listening quietly, finally offered more than a few words. "I've never cared about being famous," he said. "I cared about mastery. About being the best martial artist I could be. The films, the TV shows, those were just opportunities that came along. But the foundation was always the training." He looked directly at Marcus. "Young fighters today train for the audience, for the cameras. They learn flashy moves that look good in highlight reels. But real fighting, real mastery, isn't about what looks impressive. It's about what works." Marcus absorbed this, nodding slowly. "I've got millions of followers," he said. "But last night, I got taken down with one move I didn't even see coming." "Because you were performing, not fighting," Chuck said. Not unkindly. "You were thinking about how you looked, not what you were doing." The Rock laughed suddenly. The Rock has been guilty of the same thing. Been playing a character so long, sometimes The Rock forgets where the character ends and the man begins. The conversation continued as the meal progressed, four individuals from different worlds finding unexpected common ground. The generational differences remained, but something more important bridged them: a shared understanding of what it meant to dedicate yourself to mastery, to substance over flash. As the evening drew to a close, Chuck reached into his jacket and withdrew a small card, which he handed to Marcus. My dojo in Texas. Come for a month. No phones, no cameras, no social media. Just training. Marcus took the card with genuine reverence. I'll be there, he said. And everyone at the table knew he meant it. Outside, the lights of the Las Vegas Strip pulsed with their usual frenetic energy. Tourists streamed past, smartphones capturing every moment for immediate sharing. Billboards 40 feet tall displayed larger-than-life images, selling the promise of instant celebrity, instant gratification, instant respect. But inside that quiet dining room, a different currency had been exchanged. Not fame or trending status or viral moments, but something older and more valuable wisdom passed from one generation to the next. Respect earned, not demanded. Strength demonstrated through character, not volume. As they parted ways, The Rock extended his hand to Chuck one final time. The Rock may have started this as entertainment, he said, genuine respect in his voice. But he's finishing it as a student. Chuck took his hand. The best fights, he replied quietly, are the ones we have with ourselves. The four figures went their separate ways, carrying with them the shared experience of a moment that had begun as spectacle but had transformed into something more enduring. In the days and weeks that followed, the viral sensation of "The Lesson" gradually faded from headlines, as all such moments eventually do, but its impact continued to ripple outward in ways more meaningful than view counts or trending hashtags. The Rock incorporated a new humility into his public persona. Speaking often about the importance of substance over spectacle, his fans noticed the shift, subtle but significant, from pure entertainment to something more authentic. His first film project after the event was a biography of an aging martial arts master who finds purpose teaching inner-city youth, a departure from his usual action blockbusters. When asked about the change in direction, he simply said, "Some lessons can only be learned through humility." Marcus Vega disappeared from social media entirely. Rumors circulated that he was training in an undisclosed location, away from cameras and followers. When he eventually returned to competition months later, commentators noted a transformed fighter, less flash, more efficiency, devastating in his precision. In post-fight interviews, he spoke little, letting his performance speak for itself, a stark contrast to his former self-promotion. And Chuck Norris? He returned to his quiet life, teaching selected students at his ranch in Texas, neither seeking nor avoiding the spotlight. He had been a legend before that night in Las Vegas, and he remained one after his status neither diminished nor enhanced by the viral moment, because it had never been built on such temporary foundations to begin with. The true legacy of that night wasn't captured in any of the millions of video views or countless think pieces it generated. It was in the reminder, delivered with the silent efficiency that had defined Chuck Norris's career, that in a world increasingly dominated by noise, true strength often speaks most powerfully through silence. Respect, like mastery itself, cannot be demanded or declared. It can only be earned. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.